Good evening. Can everybody hear me all right? Outstanding. We have a couple of adjustments to what we had intended to do tonight. Don Pridemore had some conflicting scheduling issues, and he's on his way. We really do expect him any moment. And because of his current activities, as soon as he gets here, we're going to try and get him up to the podium so he can cover whatever things he wants to share with us, and then he can head on his way. So, with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And the first thing I'd like to do is ask you all to stand and rise and support me and everyone else in the Pledge to Allegiance. Thank you. First order of business from me to you is to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here. My kids are grown and gone, and I'm retired, so my life is a little bit more simple now, but it manages to get consumed with this stuff, so I don't know that it was any better than when I worked 60 hours a week. But nevertheless, I have a pretty crisp recollection of what it was like to work a lot of hours, to have to come home, take care of your car, the lawn, the snow blower, take the kids off to their events, or to be grocery shopping, cleaning, all of the things that go on in your life that makes your time very, very precious. And it's very hard to get enough time to come to an event like this. We are just like you as a group. We're everyday ordinary citizens. For the last several years, we've been keenly interested in some of the things going on in the village of Richfield. Some things you'd agree with, some things you're not. That's just the way we all are. But we're everyday ordinary people just like you are. And we have concerns about where we're going and what's happening. And we thank you for taking the time to be here tonight, because we have put a huge amount of effort into this, as I think you're going to see. I presume everybody has a survey. Does anyone not have a survey? That's good. We would very much appreciate when you depart tonight to leave your survey in the basket and by the door. We hope that some of you will provide some constructive feedback for us. Your information will help us do a better job for you. So we would greatly appreciate that. There's a spot in the bottom for your name, address, phone number, and email list, or email. And if you'd like to provide that, that's great. Especially if you have questions or things you'd like us to get back to you on, but it's not a requirement. That's absolutely, totally optional.
He's in his trailer, he refuses to come out until all the green evidence is
Okay. I'm going to start out with the introduction for you tonight, and I will transition to Mr. Pridemore as soon as he gets here. I'd also like to clarify that we invited Don Pridemore to attend this as our state representative. He represents most of Richfield. We also know that he's running for DPI, and I would expect he probably will have something to say about that. We did not invite him here to speak to our issues or local community issues. We invited him as our state representative and a candidate for DPI. Just to clarify that in case anyone had a different impression. So, starting out, our issue for tonight is issues and concerns about our community. And I know that some of you share them, otherwise you wouldn't have been here. This will be, to a great extent, a big picture overview. We're going to have a fair amount of details, but we're not going to try and get too far down that rat hole because we'd never get anything done. We know you want to get out of here, and we want to let that happen while we provide you some information. All the information that we're going to provide you tonight is based on facts that are readily available and verifiable. If you encounter something after this meeting where you think we have misrepresented something, we plea for you to contact us, because that's the last thing we want to do. And if we've misunderstood something somewhere along the path, we need to know that so we can adjust our perspective. Our agenda Oh, I'm very sorry. No, I was trying to keep that a secret, you know. I'll be the guy with all the tomatoes on the way out the door. No, thank you. I apologize. My name is Mike Watson. I'm a resident in Richfield. I moved here in 1983, and I've been here ever since with a 2-year stint when I was in California. I'm retired, and I'll tell you a little bit about my personal history. And thank you. I apologize for not mentioning that. It's a little bit stressful putting this together, I'll tell you that. It's been a rough few days, so thank you for the point of clarification. And I'm glad you also mentioned that, because this is the way we planned our agenda for tonight for you. First, this is the introduction session. There's some things I'm going to walk through here, aside from the interruption when Mr. Pridemore arrives. Then we'll have Mr. Pridemore provide whatever information he'd like to provide to you. We'll move into budgets and taxes, which I'll have the thrill of presenting to you. That'll be followed by sewer and water. Reed Snedeker will present that. That will also include the reference to low-income housing, which you probably saw on the postcard you received. And then we'll have a call to action, which will be led by Dave Rademacher. We're going to ask for, other than that very excellent question, that you hold questions off on the individual topics, and here's why. We will have breakout sessions or tables after we get done with the presentation, which will allow multiple people to be at one table at one time to ask their questions and get them answered. If we do that during the meeting, then every time we take a question, everybody's got to wait for that to get answered. So we thought it would be more effective use of your time to do it that way. The breakout tables will be for budget and taxes. I'll do that. Sewer and water, which will be Reed Snedeker. Meet our candidates. That would be anyone who happens to decide they want to run for office tonight. And then we also have a table for the Highway 175 and 164 issues. Thank you, Mr. Pridemore. Over the last 3 years, as we've been engaged in various activities in the communities, sometimes knocking on your door, things that we have heard from you that we agree with. You like our country way of life. Just about everybody. I've not heard anybody say they think otherwise. You remember that when you came to Richfield, that there was less traffic, fewer people, and lower taxes. You're concerned about your taxes, further development within our community, and what can be done to preserve our country way of life. I'd like to introduce you to a term called turnpike effect, which I ran into many years ago. Imagine a new interstate through the middle of Iowa, and it crosses a state highway. There's nothing there except for the turnpike or the freeway and the state highway. And then imagine what that's going to look like in 1 year. Maybe there's a gas station. Maybe there's one on each side. And then after 5 years, what does it look like? Well, you've got a couple of gas stations. Maybe you have a McDonald's, maybe a Burger King, maybe a Motel 6. When you come back in 10 years, you find all of that. Maybe you find a Radisson Suites hotel. Maybe you find some other local shops. Maybe there's some retail operations going on there. And after 20 years when you come back, you have all of that. Plus you have some subdivisions. You have a community. Maybe a new community has actually been born there. Now if you think about this for a minute, none of those things would have happened there had not the turnpike come through. So that concept is called turnpike effect, and I'll refer to it later. In fact, right now. What's the turnpike effect in Richfield? Well, the turnpike effect in Richfield is development. Development will increase your taxes, increase the population, therefore decreasing your country way of life. Development's inevitable. There's no doubt. But the question is, do you want to encourage it or do you want to discourage it? Do you want it to happen sooner or do you want it to happen later? Since you've lived in Richfield, do you see more or less traffic? Do you see higher or lower village taxes? And what trend do you see? Tonight it's all about what do you see as the future, and hopefully some of our concerns and vision will sync with yours. The myth of development. I was not involved in anything politically until about 3 years ago, and the more I got involved, the more I got consumed by it. And this is my personal perspective. Many communities have been developed based on the belief that by developing their community, their taxes would be lower. But it is a myth. And why do I say that? Because you can answer the question for me. What communities do you know of that have lowered their taxes as a result of development? Tell me one. What community is more developed than Richfield and has lower taxes than Richfield? Give me one. I've asked this question many times of many people, and that's the answer that I always get. And that's the rationale for saying development, lowering your taxes, is a myth. It just doesn't happen that way. A couple of years ago, the Village of Richfield conducted a strategic planning effort. In that effort, they sent surveys out to approximately 1,000 random residents. Subsequent to that, there were 2 strategic planning sessions. 77% of the people attending those strategic planning sessions who voted and established the course of action that the village is now pursuing to some degree were associated with elected officials. How do I know this? Because we got every name, we talked to a lot of people, and we found every affiliation we could. Now that's concerning to me because if you weren't part of that group, then you weren't represented. I personally don't think the selection criteria was done properly. I think it needs to be done in a manner that gets you involved in your community. Everybody, not just the select few. Money, power, or what? A couple of my favorite quotes that got me so actively involved in this. One was, "We know what's best for you." I get real scared when somebody in government tells me that they know what's best for me, when as far as I can tell they don't have any credibility or credentials to substantiate that claim. Because enough people didn't complain. Oh, this is my favorite. For those of you who don't know, at one time, actually it's still on the books, to develop a neighborhood activity center, actually several of them, but this one was at the intersection of Highway 164 and Highway Q. Now when I first heard about this, I thought, neighborhood activity center. Probably means there's a ping pong table, maybe a couple of meeting rooms, some conference tables, maybe even a swimming pool or a tennis court, maybe a pool table. That's what I thought of as a neighborhood activity center. Ha, not so fast, that's not what it is at all. A neighborhood activity center, in my terminology, is essentially a small strip mall. But more importantly, it was defined in the comprehensive plan or smart growth plan that was established in 2004. And it was very specific about what it would and would not be. And at summary level, it was not to include any businesses that would be a high traffic business. So I became aware of this because of somebody else in the group who was complaining about this. And why? Because they had conditional use zoning approved for that strip mall or that neighborhood activity center at that location, which would include stores greater than, mind you, no cap, greater than 30,000 square feet, a gas station, when there's one right on the corner already, an entertainment center, whatever that might be, and a restaurant. Now, those things don't seem to map into my thinking of a low traffic area. And so I and some others went back to the village and we complained about this. Now they've modified a couple of the ordinances, but not the other two. And here's what troubles me. So I asked our president, John Jeffords, who I like as a person, I asked him, John, if we got 100 random people, truly random people in the village of Richfield in a conference room, and we described what the neighborhood activity center was going to be, and we said, we're going to put in several of these in Richfield, and we don't know where. It might be in your backyard, maybe not, but it might be in your backyard. And the argument for doing this is going to be essentially to lower your taxes, which I don't personally subscribe to anyhow based on other data, but nevertheless, that would be the argument. How many people do you think would vote for this? And his response was, well, not very many. And my response to that was, then why did you approve this? And his response was, because enough people didn't come and complain. One other thing that I want to share is we've talked to you as a group several times about the topic of municipal sewer and water, and for those of you who have attended the forums or debates or read any other information that's been released on this, the answer is always, no, we're not going to have municipal sewer and water here. It's not qualified, it's just been no. However, we have never believed that would be the case, and we still don't. And you're going to hear the reasons for our beliefs in a little while. Our argument is, first of all, we don't think it's a good idea for our community. Not anywhere, unless there's no other solution, like by a lake to prevent pollution. Short of that, a government mandated situation where there's no other way to solve the problem, we think it's a bad idea. However, we don't think that we should decide that. We don't think the board should decide that. We think that you should be enabled to make that decision. So, what the village knew is that we were considering doing direct legislation. What does that mean? That means that we would get enough signatures to require the village to have a referendum which would decide if you would have the power to vote and make that decision. That's all we think should have happened, is that you should have been able to make that decision, not a select group of people. So, they introduced an ordinance in July of last year that specifically empowers the board, and just the board, to make the decision about whether municipal sewer and water goes in along the 175 corridor. From our point of view, they consciously, they deliberately stripped you of your right to decide. And we think you should have had that right. So, my response from several people at the board when I've talked about this is, well, Mike, you want direct democracy where the whole population decides on everything. That is absolutely not true. We don't want the population to decide on everything, but we do think that as the population, as the taxpayers, as the constituents, you ought to have the right to decide on the really big issues. Shouldn't be 5 elected people, it should be you. So, in closure to this, what do you do when you feel that your elected officials are not representing you? You do what we've been doing. You come here to a meeting and you find out what's going on. So, our question to you is, what will you do? Your first step is to get informed. And we're very grateful that so many of you are here tonight because we have put a huge amount of effort into this. And you'll see the evidence of that in a little bit. But without your participation, without your interest, we're wasting our time. We can only help you as much as you're willing to help yourself. The second step is determine what you can do. There are things that you can do and things that you can't do. There's no point in trying to do something you're not capable of doing. That'll just frustrate you and waste your time. The third step is to do what it is that you're willing to do. On the way down to Illinois, when I used to travel there often, one of my favorite signs on the, I believe it's the Wauwatosa High School, it said, "I will is more important than IQ." And being willing to do something and actually doing it is what's going to make the difference. We need your help.